So just take it from here. Hopefully it'll be large enough. So this is part of an ongoing effort in the journal, and it's aligned with our mission, um, where we try and bring new insights to the field. That's the main role of the Journal Business Venturing Insights. I always say that we are in a business of opening conversations, but those conversations is not just within academia, but between academia and practice, in a way that the research we do can be helpful. So we don't need to do things in addition to what we already doing in our research, but as an integral part of what we do in our job. So and that's the spirit for today. So again, it's something that we've been doing for 6 years now. So it started in 2018, 19 with well, I guess earlier than that with the Design Science Initiative, and then later on with the Rapid Response Initiative, and that's when we fully engage with translational science. And I'll go into what is our take on translational science and where is it coming from. So the part of my work has been I've been looking at impact and the impact of social science research and how can we increase the impact of science research. And we do amazing work generally, right? So we're very well-intended individuals, and since we do good work, we hope and sometimes assume that the practitioners will come to us when they need knowledge. And this is from the 2014 REF, is an assessment of the exercise, and amongst the many conclusions, one was we tend to believe under the illusion that practitioners will come to us when reality is the last place they come when they need knowledge. So and that's problematic, and that talks to the many shortcomings in what we do and how we communicate, the places we use, the media we use to communicate our work, and then the content of our work as well. Whether the content makes any difference in the world or can be grabbed by practitioners, and there's something that they can turn into action, right? And that's, I guess, that's the main concern. So in the general discussion, and I guess you've seen it loads of times, we talk about a bridge, right? There's a practice on one side and then research on the other side, and what we're trying to do is build bridges in between the two. And those bridges is not just from academia, policymakers, and they set up policy networks and practitioners. Some of them, they call themselves like pra-academics. They try and build bridges with research as well. So we've been in this constant journey of building bridges between the two. But the bridge analogy is not particularly helpful. That's what we think, because it sets just a middle space where we move things through it, but it doesn't really happen in it, right? So there's nothing activated in that space. So the depiction that picture, there's a gap that needs to be bridged. Obviously it creates an image that comes with complications, right? So we know it's just an analogy, but the use of analogies and metaphors, they have consequences. So because essentially it's an empty space, right? So there are two regions, they're completely separate from each other, and we need this sort of object to create this break-in and continuity. So there's an assumption that we need to take things from one end to the other end, and the way of doing it through communication. So we changed primarily the lexicon and the outlets we use to reach out all the audiences, right? And that's how we transport the theories we produce to audiences that are normally very, very elusive, right? So the idea of translation is a translation in lexicon, right? So we speak the language of academia, and we need to translate it into the language of practice. But if the content is not good enough, or is not produced in a way that is mindful of the needs of practice, it's whatever language you use is unlikely to reach out, right, and be used by a practitioner. So it doesn't really work well. So the thinking behind the translational initiative is that the problem is that we use this bridge, right, to try and move the science knowledge to practice, but we rarely do anything in between the two, right? So because there's a question is, well, how do we know that what we produce is being used in the way that it's been intended, is not being misused, or definitely aligns with the needs and the future aspirations of practice. So there's an opportunity in between the two to do more research, right? But in a way that it can show that alignment exists, right? So we can try and build bridges and tunnels, and we might realize halfway through that actually we're doing different things, right? So that's a problem. And again, so instead of treating it as an empty space, we say, well, there's a way of actioning. We call it the actioning the gap. So we can do something. So it's not something that we need to cross over. It's more like a common research space, where we can aim for rigor and relevance, and we're totally convinced that that's a false dichotomy. So there's not such a thing as rigor and relevance as being things are very difficult to reconcile, right? So we can do rigorous research in a way that it's practically impactful, and that we can solve real life problems with it. And I'll give you a few examples of that. So what we were trying to do in the journal is precisely open a space for that kind of research. Back in 2019, we opened a space in the journal for rapid research, right? Very much in the spirit of what we do. We publish short, punchy, and review process are fairly quick, so we can publish very timely research. And we decided to take one step further and go for really rapid research, research that is responsive to issues, crises that were might be happening, or practitioners in need of a given solution. And instead of engaging in a completely new basic research effort, what we do, well, the thinking behind it is, well, there's enough research done. It's just a matter of curating it, putting it and assembling it in a way that can be responsive to challenges. So it's a combination of rapid response funding, so that these are funding that's allocated to disaster areas normally, and they bring researchers to an area to try and provide solutions for it, and the idea of translational research, which is that sort of activating this gap and doing something so that the research we can make sure that the research will be used, or is ready to be used. And then we were, I guess, lucky in a way, because COVID happened, and after 2020, we published a significant amount of papers with practitioners, all tackling different issues related to COVID. But then from then on, we're publishing other papers around humanitarian crises and refugee crises and a few other things. So there are opportunities there to do more. And at that point, I think we were in our 12th paper published under the initiative. We decided to turn it into the translational research format. So and I'll tell you a bit about the ER3, so the Rapid Response Initiative. In very simple terms, ER3s start with one problem, and it's called the Goldilocks problems. Problems that are big enough to make it exciting, requiring a research effort, but problems that are simple enough, so they're tractable, things that you can actually work with. They're timely and they're urgent. So there's someone on the other side needing knowledge, and we are, as researchers, we're responding to that. So there's one problem owner, and the part of the research team. So if you think about what we do in the conventional translation, right? So when we try and move things to practice by turning it into or translate it into a practitioner's language, it's an exercise where we have to reflect on how our research, even when we write practical implication sections, how our research would look like in practice, or if it brought into practice. So it is an exercise to keep our research grounded. But we do it after the fact. And the problem with that is that we don't really know at that stage whether the research will be ready. So the problem owner is someone we bring into the research team, and that individual who owns the problem, so the individual is being affected by the problem, provides a steering. It allows us to calibrate and keeps our research real. Then there's one lead researcher who is in constant contact with the problem owner. And the role of the lead researcher is a brokering role. So it's negotiating between the problems being brought by the problem owner and a team of researchers that provides the answer. And once the answer comes, or the different answers come to the lead researcher synthesizes, right, and curates the knowledge so I can help solve the problem. Let me see something in the chat. No. So the three researchers that they're invited to offer their views on it. These are individuals that have plenty of experience and years of research experience in that particular field. And what we do as a problem owner, lead researcher, we expose the problem to them, and they have to provide an answer from their research. Not necessarily in that particular area, but in the broader sort of space that the team is exploring. So the one I led early in the process was linked to like social crisis in Chile. I'll tell you more about it in a second. But what we did, I asked Trenton Williams, who's done research in natural disaster. I asked Bim Naudé, who's been doing research in the crisis of democracy in Europe, and well, in linked to entrepreneurship research. And then Nick Williams has done research on economic crisis in the Balkans region. So none of them knew about Chile, and not particularly about social crisis. But the thinking behind it is that their research, decades and dozens of publications, they have sufficient knowledge to be able to provide an answer to it, right? So the trick is in the recombination of elements that allows you to provide the answer, not necessarily in the research itself. If you think about a social crisis, right? So it explodes one day, there's a rapid response by the government. They need to provide an answer like now, and meaning within a week, right? Within 2 weeks. If they sit and wait until a paper gets published 3 years down the line, is not gonna make much of a difference. So well, that's the idea of Goldilocks problem. So as you're framing the problem, in the case of the problem in Chile, we're not going to be able to solve the social crisis itself, right? And on the other end, it doesn't really make sense to try and support one business. But what we did in this case, we worked with the Economic Development Agency to try and find that sweet spot, right, in between the big space, the big problem, and the tiny problem, the reality of the business owners. In this case, it's to do with reallocation of resources. So how can policymakers reallocate resources to support a fairly decent amount of business owners being affected by the social crisis? And policy reorientation is something that we can do, and something that we can affect, right? In this case, because the problem owner was the head of one of the head of early investment within the Economic Development Agency, right? He was already managing a large pot of money, and he was with the solution we were providing. He was able to put forward a proposal to actually make a different use of the resources they were running at that point, and that's precisely what happened. And those processes takes, I mean, from experience, somewhere between from origin, because they come to us with a proposal, the team of authors, somewhere between 40 days from proposal to publication, which is the fastest one we published during COVID. I think the longest was around 100 and something days, right? So you can respond very, very, very quickly to those issues. The Chile one, it took us around 60 days from end to end. And that means that we were able to, through that, put forward a proposal for the Chilean government. So, and this is not new, right? So if you think about the COVID vaccine development, the two quotes that I love, and in comparison to what they managed to do in comparison to traditional vaccine development that takes around 15 years. Well, when you do all that sort of a basic research that then leads to approval and commercialization, they did the same, but in 10 months, right? The two quotes I really like is one is a reflection on what happened during the development process, right? And they say, well, the biggest misconception is that the vaccine development started when the pandemic began, right? So it's like March 2020. All the research started in the 70s, right? So if you collect all the information they used to produce the vaccine, right, it's many streams of research that have been unfolding over decades. So at that stage, there's enough. The thinking is there's enough out there to be able to produce a vaccine and take it into the market. So you can just go very, very, very quickly because the research has been produced already. The second one I like is that reflection. Well, there was not a eureka moment. It's not like, oh, aha, we now discovered something in through our basic science. No, I mean, they knew enough already. They curated, so they put together bodies of knowledge. They produced something that they knew they were fairly centered. It would work, and every time they were seeing progress, it's just a confirmation that things was working in the way that was expected. So it wasn't really a journey of discovery. It was a journey of making things work. Right, so it reconciles two things, right? There's something new, which is the vaccine, but there's also something new in the space of, in terms of, knowledge has been produced and how knowledge has been synthesized, but it's also something new from a practical standpoint. So there's a practical utility and an epistemic utility as well. So translational research, this is fairly common in the biomedical sciences. This is where we've taken this from. If you're familiar with that world, you see that only a fraction of the universe of researchers work in basic research. So most of the research we do in management and entrepreneurship happens here. So all the conventional mainstream journals, they operate in the space of basic science, right? So they produce theories, talking about like social relations, mechanisms, outcomes, antecedents, in this case of in the space of entrepreneurship. And we communicate that to our peers, right? That's what we normally do. And in the world of biomedical sciences, that's a T0, that is called, which is lab work, right? Essentially lab work. From then on, it's all the practices. They call it an ecosystem of practices, of research subdisciplines. The only job is to make sure that whatever's been developed in the lab is being translated to humans, to patients, to treatment, and then population health, right? And you see researchers operating across all stages, right? If you go to a clinic that it's that works in as part of a university, at least in the UK, well, you see in other countries as well. Normally what happens is they're clinical researchers operating within the space of patients, right? Experimenting with treatment, or, well, in some cases run by a contract research organization, clinical trials, and across the different phases. So out of the universe of practice that you have available within the biomedical sciences, a big chunk of it is played by non-basic researchers. By clinical researchers. And that creates an entire industry around it. So contract research organizations that exist outside the universities, and again, brokering the relationship between universities and the big pharma. That's precisely what they do, right? So there's a researcher hired by these institutions. So this space of T1 to T2, T3, and T4 is largely missing in our space. So we're hoping that someone will pick our papers and do something with it, but we have no idea if that happens. In the all cases that happens, we don't know whether they're going to use it correctly. Right? That's the thing. So imagine our research is vaccine. It's just like throw the knowledge out there, hoping that someone will do something with it, and people will find a cure for something, right? Perhaps you may think that our research is less critical than vaccine development, but you think about the big theories influencing practice and policy. Imagine nudge theory, right? Well, you need to make sure that actually works, right? So that by nudging people will change behavior, right? And that's it's largely influences policy, and how policy is constructed. So it's not trivial what we do. You might think that it's trivial, but it is not. So this is an invitation to take that side of the ecosystem more seriously. So that's where it's coming from. That's part of the inspiration. But the translation is not very not particularly intuitive. It's a bit challenging. So the translation of social sciences exists, but currently conceptualized as part of biomedical science translation. So it's the social science knowledge that the biomedical industry uses to experiment for example, vaccine development, because it is to do with adoption, or therapeutic practices, right? It's to do with adoption. So there's social science knowledge that's been brought into it. But social science translation per se, it is not really common. So you have the applied research and the theoretical research, but there's very little research in the middle. So we're trying to figure out, how does it look like? What is the equivalent of a contract research organization? What is the equivalent of a clinical trial, right, in our space? Right. So if you think about it, well, there's not really such a thing, because it doesn't really fall into the space of applied research. Precisely, it's something that happens in between, because you can also learn through it, right? So there's a contribution to knowledge through it. So what we do in translational social science, we take knowledge and insights and discoveries made in the social sciences to different stakeholders. In our case, we define stakeholders, in the case of entrepreneurship, as the entrepreneurs themselves, the communities that support entrepreneurs, meaning hackathons and incubators and accelerators and so on, and then policymakers through their agendas, incentives, and programs. So what we do, we try and enable actionable knowledge. So once you take it out and you shape it in a certain way, you know that you can take it and action it immediately. And that happens obviously through interaction, adaptation, and adoption. So you look after not just your research process in the way we understand it, but also you pay attention to the interactions that happen between researchers and practitioners, and in a way that research is being adapted to the different contexts and then is being adopted by the different stakeholders. Through that collaboration, we can identify what are the changes that are required, because we don't really know. So we can curate our research in a way that is responsive to those needs. What are the challenges that emerge throughout, right? So the world carries on. It's not going to stop. So there are things that they're constantly occurring and emerging throughout the process. And then you can figure out what is going to make a change. Right? So out of the many things we have at our disposal, only a handful of them will make a change, will trigger change. And we can set boundaries around what is possible and what it isn't. Right? So there's only so many things you can do in our research. And obviously it allows us to understand both of them, so researchers and practitioners, what is useful, how can research outputs can be used, what is relevant information that will go and solve the problem, so that we can distill everything that we do in a way that what is left is actually useful to solve the problem, right? So to be able to engage with translational research, you need to build a new ecology, right? So a new ecology of research effort. And there's a movement from what we currently do to a slightly different set of practices, right? So what we execute in our daily work, and we're trying to make that translation as intuitive as possible, and that's what we do in this, right? And engage in things that sometimes are not particularly things that researchers don't feel particularly comfortable with. So one is prescriptive and normative research. So in this sense, we use the knowledge we have to provide an answer, not just an explanation, but guidelines as to how things might happen. Then we also engage with, or can potentially engage with, because we can get to the point where we prescribe solutions, and it's up to someone else to take it forward. We can engage with implementation research. So we take those principles, normative frameworks, or whatever is being prescribed by research, And then we move into implementation phases, and we make sure that there's that sort of a continuity into the world of practice. As you do that, there have to be a consideration of the potential outcomes and consequences. So there's an assessment of what happens afterwards, and then you can reflect on the broader consequences of your work. So is it useful? Is it true? So as you can reflect on the practical and epistemic utilities at the same time, right? And that's the rigor relevance balance. So these are the kind of things that you have to engage with. What we did back in 2023, as a reflection of after the rapid response in JBVI, we published a paper offering a translational framework for entrepreneurship research, and trying to delineate how does it look like, what kind of sciences is that we have to engage with, and what are the things that we're working with in each of the stages. So if you imagine this side of the diagram is what we do, right? So we create representations of the phenomenon, we break it down, we analyze it, and then we go to our community, and then we explain through findings and theory what is the contribution of our work, right? And this is what is true about that representation of the phenomenon. And then we take the world as it is, and the basic tasks are description, explanation, and prediction, right? That's what we've been trained to do through our careers. What we do in the world of translation, which is this side of the diagram, we try and imagine go into the future, because prescriptions go into the future. This is what we should be doing, right? That's the normative side of research, and engage with our different stakeholders around the things that might need or might require some change. But to be able to do that, we start with what we have, right? Because again, if we have to conduct research to be able to do that, it's already too late if it takes you 3 years to get there. So in the case of entrepreneurs, if you think about what entrepreneurs do and use, they use models, methods, and practices, and we can definitely offer something to try and improve what they do, right? So, but it's not solely evidence, so it's not about informing practice. This is about intervening practice and making sure that the research we're offering is actually useful, and how it's being used is actually the best use of that research. When it comes to communities, the communities we work with, again, accelerators and mentors networks and so on, they work with support norms. So there are things that they know, or that they've agreed that the things work. So it's good to provide finance, it's good to provide mentoring, it's good to provide advice, right? And it's good to run networking events. So we've agreed that there are a lot of practices, right? And how we create meaning around entrepreneurship. I don't know, failure is a good thing, right? So we've created meaning around support practices. But we don't really know whether those, or most of those practices actually work. So there's the opportunity there to engage in research, right? In a way that we can improve support practices. And policymakers, they have their own narrative, goals, and incentives that we can also intervene, right? So we can communicate and engage with them. And through that, we're getting to the other end, because we are supporting entrepreneurship, not just because it's a good thing to do, but we want to make sure that there's meaningful change. So if value creation through entrepreneurship leads to aggregate value creation, well, we have to show that there's meaningful change at the population level, right? So because it's not trivial, right? So the research we do, the research have consequences, and we very rarely own the consequences of our work. So in the paper, we broke it down into sciences, right? To try and find a way of anchoring that engagement, right, between the researcher and the practitioner itself, so the entrepreneur, their communities, and the policymakers, and provide a scientific background for each of them. So the first one is called entrepreneurial science, which is coming from sciences of the artificial. It's focusing on it focuses on value creation, and it uses reflective practice, a way of engaging and trying to through that improve the art and skill of entrepreneurial practices in the space of value creation. The second one, we propose the use of community science, which is a contextualized form of citizen science, and the idea is to work with communities to try and solve, respond to local challenges. So it's all very localized. Then we provide an explanation as to how community science can be used to try and enable interventions, right? So that allows us to see whether things work and how can they work better. And the third one is policy design. Policy design is a marriage between policy science and design science, and a lot of governments are using design science currently. Not policy design, sorry, when they set up policy labs. So it's the experimentation with policy, and it's the other side of evidence-based policy making. The argument there is like, well, policy first, evidence later. So otherwise, there's very little innovation in how we do policy. So there's a possibility of working with policymakers on that front. And then finally is outcomes research. And then we can use several frameworks that's coming from health as well, that we provide a few suggestions there to assess the effect of intervention. We can assess effectiveness, we can assess contextual fit, we can assess replicability, and a few other things, right? So it's whether the interventions being provided leads to the intended effects, right? And that's something that can be shown. So we're opening a space in the journal for you guys to do any of this, right? So if the aim is to improve entrepreneurial practice, well, there are translational processes that can be used to do that. If you want to improve the work of incubators, you can do that. If you can improve the work that policymakers are doing, you can do that. And you want to show that actually interventions work, there's also space to do that in the journal. Right, so in here, there's no theoretical contributions because that's been done already, right? And properly done by colleagues. They're very good theorists. So it's just about taking that knowledge, curated in a way that is responsive to the problems that either entrepreneurs, communities, or policymakers might have. So the first paper we produce is as a result of the social crisis in Chile. I'll show you 3 examples, and then I'll pass it on to Ferran, so he can go into more details into his experience doing translational research. Is in response to the social crisis in Chile. As I was telling you before, what we did, I invited Wim, Nick, and Trent. Rodrigo, he's the former head of early investment within the Economic Development Agency. And how we open the paper is with the context. There's a situation in Chile, and there's a problem requiring a rapid response. And then what we offer is straight immediately is our proposal. So clearly this requires a policy reorientation, and then we go into the 3 spaces, right? So Wim reflecting on ecosystem democracy, so it's bringing his research on ecosystem democracy into the situation in Chile. And it's just a very short reflection as to, well, how my research can be used to tackle the problems that the Economic Development Agency was facing. Trenton Williams, as you know, he works in spontaneous venturing in disaster areas, and he brought his research into the space and said, okay, this is how spontaneous venturing can be used. And Nick Williams, his work on social cohesion after economic crisis, and the same thing, reflecting on his experience working in the Balkans and the Greek region. This is how can my research be used to respond positively to the social crisis in Chile. My work, I was the lead researcher, was to bring everything together, right? To provide a model that connects the three disciplines and uses framework to inform practice, right? And this is the normative side of it, right? Because we're still here in the space of synthesizing what we have. So at that stage, we moved to policy interventions, recommendations, and straight on, well, this is what you do, ecosystem democracy, responsive venturing, and social cohesion, and what we're expecting to see post-crisis in the long term through more intervention is so these consequences. And if you add it up, right, Veeam's and Nick's and Trenton's experience, you're looking at a good 50 years of research experience. Well, I think that's enough, right? And because they've collaborated with great researchers as well, so we're bringing decades of research into this particular effort. And the other thing we're doing is just making sure that the research they've done, it can be curated in a way that is responsive to those problems. So that's an example of what we did, and here's I'm just going to quickly show you the collection of things that the kind of topics we published research on. This is a rapid response around obviously humanitarian aid, and it's work that draws on social enterprise research, organizational resilience research, and crowdfunding research. And again, working with Feel Ready. It's a venture that developed innovative models to support to provide humanitarian aid. And very similarly, they developed a model to develop humanitarian assistance, obviously through venturing, right? So these are organizations providing humanitarian assistance. A few examples on how that can be implemented. And then through that, there's learning, right? So because there's, okay, what can we learn from this effort that can be extrapolated to other type of efforts? So there's that contribution to research as well. There's another project on refugees with an organization called Lighthouse Charities. And this is using resourcefulness theory and a group of researchers working on that, right? So, and they're very clearly delineating what are the different perspectives they're bringing in, right? So, but all to do with perspectives within the space of resourcefulness. This is to do with humanitarian crisis. This is after the refugees crisis after the invasion of Ukraine. We put together a group of researchers across Europe, and one of the outcomes of that was this particular group where they decided to provide an answer to it. And it's the same thing. So you see there's a problem owner. This is an organization provided that's called the Impact Hub, providing support to Ukrainian refugees, delineating what are the problems that need to be solved, and then the three different perspectives. And these are three different authors providing the different perspectives: co-development and social value beyond economic value, and the role of females. 4 or 5 perspectives, and then there's the work of the lead researchers synthesizing and how the different bodies of research and combined can provide an answer to the different recommendations. One on blockchain technology and how that can be used to support an organization called CELO. So it's not just a crisis situation. So this is an organization, BCT Ventures, interested in sort of figuring out how to use blockchain technology to develop or improve the services they provide. This is on non-fungible tokens. And again, is another organization that interested in using this, well, at that point, emerging technology. So this is 2022 on how to use it within the creative industries. This is Baltimore and trying to reduce crime in the area, an organization called Innovation Works, to try and reduce violent crime in the Baltimore area. This is the first we published. It was with the German government on trying to provide a rapid response to the pandemic, the COVID crisis. This is in the favelas in Brazil. There's an organization called ANIP, working with Edgar, and then trying to figure out how to provide assistance right through to disadvantaged groups through the work they were doing. And then again, we have all researchers working in the space of poverty and entrepreneurship, social enterprise, and marginalized groups, right? So you have the different perspectives contributing to it. That's ours. This is part of the COVID crisis, an organization called App Effect, the one that supports social enterprises during times of COVID. And again, it's a curation of perspectives they brought together, and through that they provide a response. So it's very much in the spirit of vaccine development, right? So you assemble teams of researchers that they have experience on it, and they go and provide an answer to it. And this is refugee crisis as well. So that's one side of it, and there's a slightly more elaborated work. Is another type of translation, which is through artifacts. In this case, a project that we did in the UK, developing tools to assess policymakers in rural areas. And we took research that already existed and published in Entrepreneurship and Regional Development, and we turned that into an entire assessment tool. It's a platform. You can just go into it. It's called Reflector Enterprises. You can take the survey, you can access resources, and this is fully available for policymakers. So it just is it's a translation exercise where we take knowledge that has already been published, and we turn it into an artifact. That artifact it goes into practice. It helps policymakers, and now we're seeing the consequences of it, right? So whether the policymaker improves as a result of it or not. And in that space, as you're moving into the intervention, there are different aspects that you can reflect on, right? And this is, again, as part of the space that we're opening through translational research, because once you delineate what is an intervention, you can reflect on the characteristics of the intervention, the context, where it happens, the processes, how it's being evaluated, the individuals being involved. So there are different aspects that you can engage with as you're moving from research that already exists into artifacts, and those artifacts will go into the world, create change, and then we're seeing the mechanisms whereby those changes happen, right? So imagine vaccine development. So what I've just shown you, and then there's the vaccine itself, going through clinical trials and figuring out whether things work or not. And this is the last example. This is a long project. It went from mental health research. It's a fairly large collaborative project that we run in the UK. And we ended up in an intervention program. The intervention program has been in the market for now 18 months. And it became a company, and the company is scaling up, now operating in 3 countries. With an organization called Man Your Business. So you can take it all the way, right? So all the way from like the basic frameworks. Again, research was already done, so you don't need to do more research at that stage. You only have to make sure that you're curating it, putting it in a way that can be responsive to the challenges that people are facing. So this is just very simple, short examples, and far from simple, but examples on how translational research could look like. So I'll pass it on to Ferran for a bit, if you want to tell the story about what you did.
Let me just share also a couple of slides that we put together. Hopefully they will be coming out on the right place.
I'll reply to the comments in the meantime.
I just need a thumbs up. Yeah, it's on the right place. No, not like before. Actually, thanks, Pablo, and also thanks, Berno, for organizing. And it's very nice to be able to share some of our experience. Maybe to complement some of the points that I think Pablo has brought up, I'll give also some perspectives of the researchers when you get involved in this type of projects, because I think maybe there are some additional elements on why I found very interesting to be part of a translational research project, or what we were trying to do at that time that also was trying to find some answers to the, in a moment of crisis related still to the COVID-19 at that time. Let me, as Pablo has mentioned also, this was part of the ER3 or the Rapid Response Initiative. And I think that at that time, Pablo, I think you had a working draft of the Chile case that actually helped us also to make sense of, okay, how does it work? What type of template should we use to communicate what we will be doing? And we got a lot of guidance that I'm very thankful when we were starting to work on the project. So what was our case? Our case, we were not, I would say, have a context where maybe some of the other papers address humanitarian crisis. Here it was more an accelerator platform, innovation platform that had a problem. I'll tell you more about this. So this was our problem owner, was Hannah. I'll introduce Hannah in the next slide. And then we built a research team where some of us were more in the ideation and translation. Here, I was not alone in this case, so it was with two other colleagues, Alex and Jeff, that helped. And as Pablo was mentioning, also we brought, in this case, 3 experts. In the next steps, I'll try to explain how we did this process. So the first thing, in our situation, the problem owner, so we were, I think, a bit lucky that the physical co-location allowed for quite a lot of informal interactions with some practitioners. And in this case, the practitioner was the manager of this Accelerate and Innovation platform. And I had, at that time, I had just arrived in Stuttgart, and she was like, okay, you come here, you supposedly know something about entrepreneurship and innovation. So why don't you help me on something? So we are right now in a situation where all my rules, all my templates, the way I work, is kind of frozen or is under question. So we are with this COVID-19. At that time, it was already hitting, and there was a complete change of the rules of the game. And then she had different types of questions, like how should I reorganize my activities as an accelerator that I work with startups? What should I do? What should I do more? Virtual events? Should I give more support? Should I let them develop things? Everyone should pivot, like everyone should change their strategy. Also, like the other question that I thought it was very interesting, like, what should I tell my startups or the ones that are partnering with us to prioritize? Should they try to now find new type of clients, to go for other markets, maybe focus on the vaccines as a possible, or the COVID-19 needs as a potential need? And basically, the question that I thought it was very also relevant in this context, she basically wanted to know, what do you have based on your evidence and research and other things that I can use so that I can help my the community that I'm active and that in this case she was leading. So Hannah, like in other papers or in other cases, I think that also Pablo presented quite a few of them. Some of the problem owners became co-authors of this journey. Hannah, at that time, we talked about this, but she was like, hey, I'm happy to support you and to interact with you, but she didn't join the author team. Maybe now I would have done some things differently. I think it would have been nice to have her as a co-author, more involved in the elaboration of the document. So, as I mentioned before, I would like to share more kind of practical aspects also from the view of the researcher that tries to do that. It was my first time doing this type of work, and I found it fascinating, very rewarding. But one of the first things that we struggled with was, okay, to which problem should we focus on? Should we narrow down more on how do you reorganize the activities, or should we try to help her to find valid suggestions, answers, prescriptions of what to do, what should the startups think about, or entrepreneurs in this type of situations? And we, because of the specificity of like our research or the background, we decided to focus more on in relation to the startups, the support to the startups. But that was a decision we made. Maybe other people would have focused on another problem of that she was bringing up. And I think that I think there was also a critical decision point when we were more or less clear that we wanted to bring insights from literature on entrepreneurial action. So how do we know when context changes, when conditions change, or even like the individuals suffer or struggle? But then it was not kind of very intuitive, like how to connect the two things. So who should, what angles, what theories, what perspectives should we tap on? And that's where I think that it was very beneficial for me, at least at that time, to have a couple of colleagues to bounce back and forth some ideas on what does Hannah, or in this context, maybe call in as a first resource that we can bring from past research that we should be touching upon. And we ended up with this identification that something that was coming into question was elements like planning, like how you coordinate or organize, the use of resources, whether you need more resources, less resources, the type of behaviors in relation to resources. That's where we thought about the concept of frugality as that it was interesting as a potential angle. And then clearly the idea of networking and what does social support or networking mean in this context also came up. So we also, I think that it's very good to have sometimes design rules, and the fact that you know that you have to limit the number of angles also helps you to, okay, let's start with those 2 or 3 angles, and let's see if we can move this forward and do some, generate some valuable insights. But then the new challenge that I actually also struggled with was, first, we had a team of experts that were fantastic, because I also think that we were very lucky to be able to bring and engage with people that, as also Pablo was mentioning before, bring a big legacy with them and knowledge and depth. But at some point, we all more or less got into this situation where it was even also sometimes uncomfortable also for them to move from the just putting together research insights to saying, okay, in this type of situations, what would be my recommendations? Like what should you be thinking about as potential answers to the problem that Hannah was bringing to us? And something that for us became also interesting as a learning for all of us, it was this whole process of calibrating this advice that we were putting. And when I mentioned here is also the value that it had for us to identify and think about the boundaries and the nuances of some of this typical advice that also, as before we were discussing, appears in the practice implications that tends to be do this, do this, do this, do more of this, but doesn't tell you how to implement. I also thought that it was very nice to see this concept of that it's not only about the prescriptive recommendations, but also to think about the implementation of some of those recommendations. And that's something I'm afraid we don't do often in the when you do a paper and at the end you put those practical implications. You don't consider what are the trade-offs when it comes to implementation. I zoom in a bit more on this aspect, because something we were worried about is that some of our kind of recommendations, as other maybe times it happens, tend to be quite generic, common sense. So it's not bad that it's common sense, but the fact that they are generic or not kind of bounded, it makes them a bit less meaningful for those that maybe want to carry or follow them or use them. So at that time, for example, recommendations like, yeah, you should be more flexible. You have to adapt to this situation. Yeah, so maybe a recommendation is you should tell entrepreneurs that they should be ready to change or they should look for support. Yeah, so a good thing to have the practitioner with you, and even formally or informally, as in our case, is that it was very obvious that I wasn't seeing myself telling to Hannah, yeah, Hannah, just tell them to be a bit more flexible and adapt, because this would be, yeah, not very useful for her to kind of bring something new or that based on the evidence and research that had been done on the topic. So something that I actually thought that helped us as a group of authors to start thinking was, when do some of our recommendations stop working? When is, for example, too much networking counterproductive? Or when is engaging too much in giving emotional support to peers or to other entrepreneurs can be even negative for you? So by playing with the classic, this inverted U shape of some of these classic prescriptions, we started to see, okay, then this is the end of this approach or this perspective. And actually, maybe something else kicks in here. So maybe we can write this down. We can say, hey, do this, but consider when this is like that or this other situation. And on the right side, you see what was coming out a bit our framework, where we were trying to put together the different perspectives also across the crisis process. And in the framework summary, it's just you try to send one message, but in the text, we try to elaborate a bit further. What did we mean with some of those recommendations? Maybe the final point on this aspect that also was a learning for some of us in the author team is, again, this idea that when we try to think about the implementation of some of those recommendations, you also need to consider that the person who's implementing that, policymaker, entrepreneur, Hannah in this case, she would have to stop doing something else to do what you are telling them to do. So there is most of the time there is a trade-off, or she would have to allocate more time to something and maybe less resources to something else. And I thought that I hadn't seen the presentation from Pablo on these aspects, but it fits very well with this idea that being aware of the consequences of some of our recommendations. Because if you read them too straightforward, just say, you need to bring more agility, more virtual meetings, says, yeah, but what will be the implications of that if I just go in following those two recommendations that you are sharing? And actually, it also comes across as a burden for some of those that receive the recommendation, where all what you say is do more of X, do more of Y, do more of Z, without showing that actually if they do all these things, they interact later on. Again, maybe with medicine, it's much easier, no? If you say, take more of this thing, take more of that other one, says, hey, what about interactions? No, I don't know. I just recommend that you should do those things. So I thought that this was a fantastic learning, and that's one of the things I like to take with me from this experience, because it made me also think more when we recommend or we talk about insights that come from research. But I'll just more on the practical aspect, and this way hopefully we still stay a bit within time. So I'm going now very, very practical. So some things that work for us and some things that maybe we would have done differently. So you saw that most of and it's kind of, it's explicit also now on the expectations of this type of papers or this type of work, to have a problem owner that you can interact with or engage, because you might need to do more than one round. So it's not enough to talk to them once and then, okay, I got it. Because in the process, there is the same way that the bridge doesn't work very well, is because there is a process of common interpretation of what are you talking about. And it takes a few times to go back and forth and to co-develop this with the problem owner. And that's where it was valuable to have also other colleagues to help or discuss this concept. And something that I think that we did well, but maybe, it could be also have been done in another way, is like how we were able to actually engage those expert contributors with us. So I think we were very lucky, because the people we invited, the people that was on our top of our head as the person I wanted to have in the paper, they responded yes. And I don't know if it was because at that time everyone was a bit in shock also during the COVID time, and that's why we were lucky, or we were, it worked out. But I also thought, what would have happened if those people would not have been able to engage? And then I think that opens questions on how sometimes you might have to design this, considering who can bring those insights, the different perspectives. And something that worked very well with them is that actually I would say two of the experts that we brought, one of them actually kept working on the topic and has developed a whole research line on this topic of crisis and entrepreneurship. And the other, the other person in this is with Tim Michaelis. Actually, we've been able to activate collaborations or relations that otherwise wouldn't have happened. So I'm just trying to highlight also that this type of efforts that go beyond the usual research we do also open new possibilities on different ways of thinking, and it shapes us also as researchers. So I see as you can see, many positive aspects of doing this type of work. So maybe just to explain also and I think the concept has appeared before. So why is it, or why I understood after doing the paper that it was so important to start with this problem description, I think, 1 page, 2 pages, because this becomes like the artifact that works as an anchoring point for the conversations you have with your external or expert contributors, but also to keep cooking and developing the idea. So it allows you to go back to the source that motivated the paper, and it allows to keep what usually is a complex team. It's not just one author or a couple of authors, but it works very well. And so that's something that I really see the importance of this. And maybe the third bullet point, when we talk about the calibration exercise. So we were following also the structure that some of these other papers. You can see there that there are different perspectives. But what was very interesting was also the process of engaging with those experts to calibrate, adjust. Also, once we were collecting the different viewpoints, whether we were having overlaps or things that didn't maybe make sense or aspects that were not covered enough. And those one-to-one, we ended up doing one-to-one exchanges. I think it would have even been more valuable maybe to have put the different people from the different perspectives together and discuss more, but yeah, we didn't do this. So maybe that's something in another situation I might consider doing. I think that the other aspects on editing, I think they make a lot of sense. You want to keep this internal consistency with the different viewpoints on how you summarize them or how you build that framework. And this is essential also. But maybe my kind of list, and actually I thought that it aligns well again with the previous inputs that Pablo has shared, so that some things that we couldn't do that much in this project, and maybe in the future I might be doing more, is that also look at the implementation options. So once you, besides identifying problems in the implementation, so I didn't give Hannah many different possible ways that she could carry this forward. So I just gave her the outcomes of the process, what we thought about. I talked to her a couple. She's still kind of, we meet sometimes, not to talk about this, but other challenges. But I think it would have been nice that we would also have engaged a bit on these design aspects of the possible implementation options as a learning also for us. And we also didn't engage in understanding or looking more about what was the impact actually in those receiving these new approaches or suggestions. We didn't follow that impact on the startups, or how did they perceive it, and so on. Another thing we didn't do, and actually I also thought that that's interesting element, is this idea of, okay, but this crisis was not kind of, it had different phases as we were also identifying. And I think it could have been nice to understand more how some of that advice or recommendations needed to be tuned or adjusted depending on how the crisis evolved. In that case, it evolved after 1 year, but there are other crises that are temporally much longer and they persist. So I think it would be valuable to also understand more in this type of context what happens actually when you try to implement some of those elements. I think that was what I wanted to share. So I hopefully this gives an example of what we did. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, I've been responding, and I'll carry on responding to questions in the chat. But if anyone have any questions, please feel free to raise your digital hand and shoot. One last thing before you all go, and before we let you go. So we are in the spirit of this. We have the translational science initiative, and then if you submit an article, you have to submit a proposal first, and then you submit an article under translational science. So if you go to the submission system, but we're launching a new initiative that will go to the heart of it. It's a special issue on health and well-being, but focusing solely on intervention research. Right, so we don't want papers theorizing on it. We don't want papers conceptualizing health or trying to figure out what's going on. There's enough out there. So what we want is interventions, obviously science-based interventions, and want to see whether they work or not. Right, the problem is so big. Right, suicide rates are so big. Depression and anxiety rates are so high that we have to do something. This is a call for the civic responsibility of the researcher, and we open a space for that to happen. So no more theories on. It's time to move to, okay, if we intervene groups, this is how mental health improves. This is how anxiety rates decrease. If there's a new incubation model that's being tested, we want to see what works, right? Because we clearly need urgent responses to it. So this is coming up very, very soon. Again, it's a special issue similar to the rapid response, but both of them are within the space of translational science. So trying to do more to try and promote this kind of research within our discipline. So we have 6 minutes past. So just to say thank you very much. Journal is open. If you have crazy ideas, just send it our way. And if you get engaged in translational research, just reach out, either Ben or myself. Send us an email, and we can send you the template that we use for the proposals. And then we evaluate the proposal first, right? So we also reduce the entry barriers and the risk for the researchers. So you need to write a full paper if the proposal is not accepted, right? So it should be easier, and it's a very short one. So again, thank you very much, and yeah, see you around.